I think probably there'll be a couple of other people coming, but I don't think we need to wait for them. It's already 8 o'clock.
Sure. Can you confirm if my screen is visible?
Yep, it is.
Okay. Right. So hello everyone. I'm Nitin. I'm taking a session on weighing. Do note that during my session, I'll ask you guys to answer a few questions like during multiple occasions, and I won't be moving forward unless you guys answer them because there's really no point. There's no interaction. There's really no point going into the session. So please do unmute. Similarly, if you have any questions, like during my session and you don't want to wait till the end because you think like if I don't answer it now, you can't like understand what's going on. Just stop me then. I'll be happy to clear doubts as we're going, right? Here are the things basically I'll be covering in the session. Firstly, comparative and prioritization. Secondly, how to set metrics. Thirdly, how you weigh impacts. And fourthly, what kind of training should you do on your own to go ahead and practice weighing? Because the thing to notice that sessions can only help you so much. I think what matters more is how much training you can do on your own using the theory that you learn in these sessions. And that's why that part is there. So firstly, comparatives and prioritization. What is a comparative? Basically, the comparative is answer the question, what do both worlds look like? And more importantly, what the difference between both worlds are. Because the similarities between both worlds don't matter, except for you to recognize what arguments you need to draw from the debate. So to find the comparatives, there are four broad things you should do. This is something that you'll probably do within prep, but sometimes you can't necessarily predict what the other team will run, so you might have to do it within the speech or as the debate goes on, right? The first thing you should do is understand what the common ground is, because even though there will be a lot of things you and the other team disagree on, there will be quite a few things that you do agree on, and using those things, it's better if you point out the like differences. When I say agree on, it won't be that you both think are similar, but rather uh, differences between the two words that you agree on. Secondly, this again is something you can only do during prep, is that you should look at the motion slide. Motion slides will often have things like examples of the policy passing, or if it has a full info slide, then it will literally give you some clues as to what both words look like. Thirdly, providing analysis for what you want a comparative to be, and this is something that you can only do in your first speaker, at least in a good room, wherein you explain that this is a side, this is what our world is likely to look like, and this is what we're fighting for, right? A good example, just to make things a little more clear, would be, for example, if it's a debate about a policy that requires money, right? Like, for example, this house would have universal basic income. For those of you who don't know, universal basic income is basically the state takes state gives everyone a certain amount of money, and that money is generally enough for their sustenance. So, for example, in America, it would be like giving them $500 a month or so, and so on. That's what UBI is. So, in that debate, side government has to give analysis for how much this UBI is likely to look like. Similarly, they have to give analysis for how bad the current systems of, say, welfare are, wherein because op will be arguing for, look, don't give these people money, give them hospitals, education, so on and so forth, which means you at side government will have to give analysis for why these hospitals are bad, and you have to give analysis for why you'll be giving people like a large sum of money. When I say large sum, it obviously like won't be a few $1 million. Like, you have to probably like try to fight for $1,500 or so, whereas op will try to run the opposite. So you have to give actual analysis. Again, if you guys don't know what analysis is, it's basically argumentation. There are two types of primary arguments you can run in debates, that is deductive arguments and inductive arguments. Deductive arguments are basically where you have premises and you come to a conclusion from that premise. Inductive arguments are where you use a premise, where you use a conclusion or you use existing examples to prove your point. I'm assuming you guys know what arguments analysis are, so I'm moving ahead. But if anyone still is unclear, you can stop me. Lastly, resolving obvious disagreements when setting up comparatives, right? I think, like in the example I gave you, where this debate is about UBI versus welfare, at whip or whenever you're weighing the debate, first ensure that the obvious clash that the other team has going to have, where the op will argue, look, the money you'll give people is going to be too little and they won't be able to survive. All the obvious disagreements are the first thing you need to tackle when setting up comparatives. So here's an example first. This house would ban the sale of meat, which means like you're forcing everyone to go vegan, no selling of meat, no killing of animals for food, so on and so forth. You are side opposition. Just tell me now, what comparative would you guys set up at opposition? Or what comparative would you fight for? If you're like, if your first speaker, tell me what you'll fight for. If you're third speaker, tell me what what you like, what you'll prioritize. Anyone can unmute.
We'd probably push for a world where you still have meat.
Yep, that is correct, but not very strategic. So, what does your world look like? Because sure, your world has meat, but that's also status quo. And Gav is going to talk about how in status quo animals are treated really poorly and factory farming is inhumane. In that case, what do you strategically think your comparative should be at side opposition?
Can we say this can have like nutritional disadvantages inside government, because then a lot of people, they get their protein source from meat, and even though side government can come up and say that, look, you can have beans and pulses, we don't think that is necessarily something that can like last long, and this can have nutritional effects on a lot of people.
Again, that's a good argument. What I want to know is, what is your world? That's all. Okay, so for example, side government says our policy is we ban meats. What is your policy at all using the same amount of fiat? Your argument is totally valid. I think that's a good argument to run. But this is just what comparative do you set up, or how do you model out your world to make it even simpler?
Responsible consumption of meat, which is to say that we will discourage practices like factory farming, but will look for like much more ethical production and consumption of meat. So encouraging those kinds of practices as opposed to a world where you attack everybody's food practices and don't allow them to eat meat.
Right. Excellent. So basically at opposition, the best comparative for you is not setting up a world where all meat is completely legal. Since Gov has to ban all meat, you can just go ahead and ban things like factory farming and move on from there. That way you have a common ground with side government where you agree that, look, these things are inhumane, and then you can just discuss which solution is a better way to win the debate. And I'll explain towards the end. I started with comparatives because that's chronologically correct. But when I'm explaining exactly weighing to you, you'll understand why all this will help you weigh the debate easier down the bench. Does anyone have any question regarding this, or can we move to prioritization? Okay, I'm guessing no questions right now. So on prioritization, the reason you prioritize is quite simple. Because you'll never have time to weigh all arguments, and if you have time to weigh all arguments, you're probably winning the debate already. But in most good rooms or in most close debates, you can weigh one or two arguments at best. Or if it's a very close round, then you probably can weigh one argument, and the rest of it you just have to leave to the judge, right? So firstly, what arguments do you drop, and then I'll explain how you should prioritize arguments. Firstly, any argument that is symmetric, which means that any argument wherein the benefits can be felt on both sides. So, for example, in the meat example I gave you, side government cannot go ahead and weigh things like factory farming being bad, because that argument is now symmetric, because opposition is also banning factory farming, they're just not banning meat as a whole, right? Secondly, arguments that do not impact the actor in the debate. Oftentimes, motions have actors wherein this house as Russia, or this house as America, or this house as Putin, you'll get these motions, and there can be a lot of valuable impacts that specifically don't affect the actor. So you should drop them. That's it. An example of this would be this house as USA, or sorry, this house as UK would pay reparations to past colonies. A lot of Gov teams will first explain why colonies deserve reparations and the benefits to like these colonies if they get the money now, and so on. That's a good argument, but it doesn't affect the actor, because unless you can prove why UK should care about like the growth of a country like India, you're not going to win that debate. So you should drop that argument. Third argument is arguments that you don't think your first two speakers have proven or first speaker has proven, or you yourself don't think you have proven sufficiently. This is unlikely to happen, but sometimes it does happen. So keep that in mind. So drop the arguments if it is so. Ideally, you do not run any such argument to begin with. But a lot of time it just happens that you can't predict the opposition's model or the opposition's case, or sometimes during prep you're not too aware of certain things and you do run them. So drop them when it comes to weighing arguments, right? Right. How then do you prioritize the arguments to weigh? Because even if you're not dropping arguments, start by weighing the most important arguments first, right? Arguments that are most relevant to the motion, arguments that are most robust, and arguments that have the largest impact are what you use to decide which one you prioritize. I'm going to explain what all of this means when I'm talking about weighing in general, because like there is no single definition. It's going to depend on the motion. So I've left a definition for now, but just keep this in mind for when you get to prioritization, right? So here's another example. The motion is this House believes that South Korea should develop nuclear weapons. So at side government, your speaker goes and says, look, South Korea is under constant threat from North Korea, and we should immediately begin the development of nukes. Then opposition comes and says, yes, we agree South Korea is under threat, but we think what we want is USA, like we want USA to be able to place their nukes in South Korea, and they give lots of analysis for why their interests are likely similar and why they also have incentives to do so. So the question for you guys, start by answering in the chat, and then I'll ask, depending on your answer, for you guys to unmute. Do you think you should spend time weighing this argument, the argument of how South Korea needs to be safer? If you guys have doubts regarding the question, you can ask me because no one has answered yet. Okay, one answer. Okay, excellent then. So everyone who answered did get it right. So like, I don't think we need to explain the answer. So that's actually pretty great. So yeah, the reason you don't weigh this argument at all is because the model that opposition set up or their counterfactual co-ops all your benefits. The argument is therefore symmetric. So yeah, everyone's right. We don't weigh this argument at all. You drop it, pretend like you never ran it, right? Right, setting metrics. So I think before like we get into metrics, understanding what metrics are, it basically there is no thing in this world that is objectively more valuable or less valuable than any other thing. And if that is the case, like then it won't be a debate, right? Like there is going to be no debate where someone says this house prefers $1,000 over $100. Like that's not a debate op can win. Which means debates or how you weigh arguments will come down to how. So just one second, I'll answer this question first and then I'll move on to metric. So you weigh arguments when someone has asked, do we weigh arguments or not if the benefits are similar? Of course, you weigh arguments if the benefits are similar. But in this case, the benefit is exactly the same, which is to say, both teams agree, yes, South Koreans are in danger. Both teams agree we want nuclear weapons. And both teams have access to the exact same deterrent. The only debate here that you're going to have after OP sets this model is which is a better deterrent or which is a better way to get nukes. Should we develop our own nukes or should we take nukes from USA and allow them to place nukes in our country? So I hope that answers your question. Because yeah, that's it. Like I don't think I can explain that any better. But if you have any questions further, please feel free to ask. Right. So moving on to setting metrics. So when you're weighing arguments, there will not be any objective standard you can weigh any argument to. You can only weigh why an argument is more valuable based on the metrics you set, right? And giving you an example for this. So if there's a debate about pineapple pizza versus pepperoni pizza, here are like the arguments you could make for each side. The pepperoni pizza is like the flavors are good because they complement each other. They're cheap and readily available, and they're a proud part of Italian culture. A pineapple pizza, on the other hand, tastes absolutely shitty. because of just the fact that pineapple and tomato sauce are both acidic. Pineapples take a longer time to grow and they're a disgrace to humanity. Which means if you generally view it up, like obviously the pineapple pizza is worse, right? But if you set metrics correctly, you can have the seemingly losing side win. Because if the metric is which food is better at keeping people away, or which food is like can use to make people suffer, then clearly the opposition wins this debate. It's a silly example, but we'll do like more serious examples later, right? So yeah. So how then do you set metrics in an actual debate round? And it's quite simple, right? The first way is to like directly analyze your metric like you would any other argument, right? Which is to say that you argue that saving lives is more valuable because, like, one, in general in society we do value life, but also the value of a life is something that is objectively important to people, because like if people are dead, they can't access agency, like people around them are sad, so on and so forth. Secondly, when you're like explaining the rationale, you have to explain the rationale in accordance to the actors as well, right? For example, this house as a Black Lives Matter movements would do something, and when you're setting the metric before you weigh the argument, you have to set it by explaining what the BLM movement cares about, and then you have to give again rationale. I'm hoping everyone understands like how rationale works, but again, just simple deductive reasoning, right? It is a social movement, which means it probably wants to affect change. If it wants to affect change, it probably needs more people to join, or probably needs to be sustainable. So basically, justifying based on what the needs of the actors are, you can justify what should be valued more in the room, right? Secondly, using intuition pumps. This is because a lot of debates, especially ones that rely more on principles, are going to depend on you proving to the judge that that principle in of itself is valuable, regardless of impacts, right? Especially when it comes to trading off, say, the happiness of few people for the happiness of society, or trading off short-term goals for long-term goals, or just in terms of whether certain movements should let go of like what they believe in, just to make the lives of certain people in the movements better in the now. All these debates, you have a lot of principles. The way you weigh them is using intuition pumps. For those of you who don't know what intuition pumps are basically where you draw analogies or parallels between what is being debated and what you want people to do. Like what is something people already hold valuable, right? Like for example, if the debate you want to argue that look, the state does not have any right to enforce better outcomes on society when it takes away individual rights. Like for example, you're against. Let me think of an example. Okay, take an example of sugar taxes, right? There are lots of there is a motion that this house would impose tax on sugary drinks over a certain extent, or impose a tax on alcohol. It's called sin tax. Basically, things that are considered bad, the state should impose taxes on them to de-incentivize people from using that. That claim has some objective utilitarian benefits to society as a whole. People get thinner, people get healthier, and so on and so forth. If you have to weigh against that and say that, look, that is not the only metric for you to weigh arguments, is not just benefits. This is one intuition pump you can run, right? For example, you can say that, look, we know that exercise is good for everybody, and that if everyone exercise every day, the society would be slightly better, because less heart attacks, like people would be a little more active, so they can contribute more, etc., etc. But at the same time, you think it would be absolutely absurd if a government made it compulsory for everyone to exercise 1 hour a day, or made it compulsory for someone to run. And if you use this intuition pump, at least a judge will start thinking, oh yeah, perhaps there is more to like this debate than just which is a better world to live in. Thirdly, explaining your goals are prerequisite to meeting another team's goals. This is something sort of this tool is something that will be applicable only in very few debates. Primarily those debates where there is like a clear short-term loss, right? For example, this house prefers a world where individual rights are limited for the benefit of society. And this is like the opposite example of the one I just gave you. In this at Gov, you will argue that look, agency is only useful if you can like actually have agency access to that agency to begin with. I'll give you a better example because I think it's a little more complicated. Let's take an example of taxes, right? if you take taxes away from people, you're limiting their ability to function in society, because now they can't buy as many things as they could have, and you're stealing from them. But at Gov, you argue, look, you're stealing from them now to increase like access to welfare for other people and access to safety and roads and other things for these individuals, which means limiting their agency right now or taking something away from them right now is a prerequisite to have more agency in general, which means what you need to value, like the metric then becomes which thing is a prerequisite for the other thing. I hope that example makes sense. If not, like you guys can let me know in the chat or unmute if you guys have any doubts up to so far, because we got into weighing arguments then directly. Okay, I'm guessing no questions, and so let's get to weighing. 7 ways to weigh an argument. Firstly, using characterization of factors, situations to explain the value. I already explained how you set metrics based on the characterization of actors. This is just using that when you're weighing arguments. Okay, before that, sorry once again. When we talk about weighing arguments, the way you need to think of impacts is quite simple, right? You need to think of it like literally on a weighing scale, wherein you need to add value to your impact to sort of tip the debate in your favor. Which means when we talk about weighing impacts, we're explaining the extent or the impact of whatever policy is passing is either good or bad. That is something you have to explain, and that's what it means to weigh an argument, right? So in the first way of weighing, what you're essentially doing is using the characterization of the actor of the motion or the situation of a certain country to add weight to the claims you have made, right? For example, if there is a motion about like should government give stimulus to people, the way you'll add weight to your claim of look, people need money is by talking about how badly they have been hit by the pandemic, or how them not having access to money now during inflation means they're probably going to starve, so on and so forth. So you use characterization, you use the world that this debate is happening in to explain what the value of your impact is, right? Because there is a large difference between like $500 in general and $500 for a starving person, and that difference is like proving that this is the second $500 we're talking about can win you the debate. The second way to do it is arguing rational value of the impact in a vacuum, right? Because a lot of debates you'll be either weighing things that are too different or weighing two completely separate worlds, so you can't do the first thing, prioritize the first thing anyway, right? So in that you'll argue things that cater to a rationality of the average reasonable voter. For example, a simple example would be like 10 people are dying in my world and 100 people are dying in their world. So choose my world, so on and so forth, right? The way this would work in a debate, like, okay, so the debate is this, right? This house supports implementing excessive safety laws, car safety laws, like forcing people to wear seat belts, forcing manufacturers to no. Okay, sorry, just 1 second. Someone has asked a question, does weighing come from third speaker only? I'll answer that towards the end because I'm not sure like it's in a part of this. I'll answer that towards the end. Right. So coming back to my, like, assume the motion is this house would implement heavy safety laws for cars, forcing people to wear seat belts, forcing manufacturers to have six or seven airbags per car, and so keeping very strict speed limits and so on, right? In that, if you are Gov, op is likely to argue that look, people have something called basically it's called risk compensation. What it means is when individuals feel that they are safer, they're likely to be more risky, right? Which means if my car has airbags, I'm likely to drive a little bit faster, or I'm likely to not worry as much as opposed to when I didn't. So at Gov, you can say, look, ops claims are reasonable, but purely on number, presumably we are saving more lives than are actually going to drive dangerously, because majority of the accidents aren't caused because of like reckless driving. They're caused because of like just mistakes or people being at the wrong place in the wrong time. Which means what you're proving there is that even though ops claims are correct, it's affecting lesser people, and an average reasonable voter should rationally value losing less lives over valuing losing more lives. That's just one example, but in general, you can do that. Thirdly is plausibility and robustness, right? for this, take an example of the South Korea debate, right? Since the impact of both the teams are the same, the way you have to weigh the arguments is by explaining the how likely your end impact is, or how many situations, or in your best case, in your worst case, in different characterizations, does your argument realistically work, right? For example, in this, like in the debate about South Korea having nukes, US placing its nukes over there, the way you weigh the argument is on government is by saying that, look, if we develop our own nukes at all points in time, we'll always have nukes because like there are nukes, right? But in opposition's world, if USA's internal politics does not want foreign intervention, or believes that money is spent better elsewhere, or needs the nukes for some other region, they'll take it away. Which means even though our end goal is similar, ours is a more robust argument because it works in a larger number of cases for a more period of time. Therefore, we are argument higher than theirs. Lastly, time. This is also very debate specific, but a lot of times you'll be trading short-term things for long-term things, right? For example, this house would like give large stimulus checks to people during a pandemic. Opposition can argue about things like inflation, which means you're weighing long-term loss of inflation against short-term loss of people dying. The way you weigh an argument there is, sure, inflation is a problem, but right now what people need urgently is money, and we give that to them. And in the long term, even though some harms may exist, they're one like speculative, but secondly also probably they can be adjusted for, right? Fifth is regional priorities. Again, this is very debate specific, but you can argue that certain regions have revealed preferences for certain behaviors, which is to say, if a country has a lot of liberal individuals who have shown a preference for liberal policies, the impact of, say, liberalization of certain communities, or the impact of that country paying reparations, can be something you can positively say that the people want, and people will be happier to live in such a country, right? Lastly, principles. The thing to note here is, principally weighing impacts is different from running principles as an argument. For example, if in the stimulus debate, if side opposition says that if you give people a stimulus check, they'll just use that money to buy drugs, or they'll use that money for other purposes, right? Then you can say perhaps they might use that money for whatever they want, but on a principle, we need to ensure people have the agency to operate in life and make that choice themselves. I'm not framing the principle to well right now, but basically you can argue that whether people do good or bad with the money they're given is up to them, or the life they're given is up to them. But we have to ensure that they have a life, and then they have enough resources to sustain within that life, and that is an a priori, which basically means that it is something that is considered like that good is considered antecedent to how they use the money, or how their lives end up, right? And so on. So that's how you can weigh an impact on principle. This is different from running a completely principled or deontological argument. Lastly, examples. This isn't exactly a seventh piece of weighing as much as it is something that you just use with the first six, because a lot of people, when weighing arguments, keep it too abstract so people can't relate. So for example, on the sixth argument, right, the principles one, the way you can use examples to make your case more compelling is like asking the judge, okay, are you okay with the gender wage gap? Because like if these people get more money, they might use the money badly. No, right? We believe people should be compensated fairly and have more money at all points in time, and so on. Or like, would you be okay with me killing someone because they were not like if they're allowed to live, they'll use their life badly? Like it's a weird intuition pump right now, but similar examples and intuition pumps you can use in debates to explain value to individuals, right? If you guys have any questions, let me know, then we can move on to examples. Oh, okay. So seeing as just one question someone has asked in the chat, whether only VIP speakers do this. No, I don't think so. I know that it's not as a third speaker doing it. The reason it sort of sounds like that is because the weighing will always come towards the end chronologically, which is to say that everything I explained before, things like setting metrics, things like characterization, and setting up comparatives that are fair for you, is something that you have to do first, and after that you run your argument, and then you weigh it at last. So depending on whether you're the kind of depending on your team dynamics, you either push all the weighing to your whip or you push the weighing to the end of your argument. Like that's totally personal. Like that's totally up to you. But weighing does come towards the end only. You can't weigh an argument before you have proved it. I hope that makes sense. But do keep in mind that when running the impact of an argument, you can weigh within that as well, right? Which means that when you're explaining why your argument is valuable, or like you're explaining that look, this policy passes, then this is going to happen, and this is bad. In that, you can do a little bit weighing preemptively as well. But even then, it's still going to come at the end of an argument. And depending on your team dynamics, you can move all the weighing to your speaker or do a little bit of weighing at every speech. Like that's really up to you. I hope that answers your question. Then we'll move on to an example, right? This also believes that compensation should be paid for those who have their culture appropriated. For those of you who don't know, culture appropriation is basically where a majority culture uses like totems or like parts of a minority culture to either just use it or create profits off of it. For example, white individuals selling like Native American craft or not Native American craft, like craft that looks like Native American craft or paintings, so on and so forth, to profit. Or for example, I mean, I don't know how accessible this example is, but white individuals basically capturing the jazz market or capitalizing on jazz post the black community, making it so on and so forth, right? I'll give you some time to read the cases as well, but I'll be reading them as well. You are Gov in this case. So you argue that look, compensation is necessary in case of cultural appropriation, as it helps to provide victims with resources they need and deserve as compensation for the behavior. With stronger legislation and rulings on the provision for compensation for cultural appropriation, minority communities would be significantly better off. This would be a major step in reversing the damage of said appropriation, as it would allow the community to develop and gain recognition for traditional designs and ideas. OP says, look, cultural appropriation prevents assimilation between members of society and creates a further division based on arbitrary features of one's ancestry or appearance, right? If reparations through the use of compensations were to occur in addition to this, it would create a more polarized and divided society, as in us versus them culture is created. Ops case is a little complicated. Sorry for that, I should have given an easier example. But basically, to put it like in a very crude way, it's arguing that look, if you say that to a certain extent the black community owns jazz, or Native American individuals own a certain kind of craft, what that means is that where we come from or the differences that we have are like beyond just like what we look like, right? That means there is something fundamentally different about us, and there is fundamental ownership over products of what our ancestors did. And again, like the reason this is bad is because in general or on probably that in countries the majority is likely to have like more power and therefore have be the ones even in power post post the discrimination has happened. No, that's not always the case. It just happens to be the case, which means if they start believing there are differences, it's probably going to lead to like bad policy making. And when you don't have things like assimilation, they're going to be the ones living in like the rich neighborhoods, whereas the minority communities are the ones going to end up in the bad neighborhoods with less resources and so on. Just based on like how oppression works, doesn't have to be the case all the time. So yeah, you guys can like unmute and explain based on any of these 7. How would you weigh Gov's impact more than Ops impact, assuming they both prove the arguments equally? Just in terms of the impact, one is assimilation, one is money. Oops. Yep. Anyone? Guys, come on. You guys have to answer.
Maybe we can say that assimilation is already really difficult to achieve on opposition and government. And the difference is in government, we're the only ones who are able to compensate. And it's more important because we're able to achieve like a likelier goal.
Excellent. That's absolutely perfect, because you're literally explaining that your goal is more likely it's a far more robust idea than opposition's world that may or may not happen, and most likely won't happen. And even if it does happen, it can also just be a function. If it does happen, it can happen in both worlds anyway. Like, that's great. Any other way anyone else would like to weigh these two arguments impacts?
In two more ways, I think this can be done. Firstly, is in terms of using the characterization of this actor, which is to say that the cultures that tend to get appropriated tend to be marginalized in nature, right? And they are at the margins of the society, which means that compensation can achieve a lot for them in terms of monetary value or in terms of social impact. So in terms of the urgency of the situation, a compensation for these communities will be much better off. So one thing is that. Second thing is, irrespective of the impact, on a principal basis, we have the responsibility to repair the damage that has been done to these communities, which is to say that these communities, we owe something to these communities. So irrespective of whatever practical benefits are coming about, we owe this to this community. So
Right. The first one is absolutely perfect. The fact that you can very easily prove that money is more important to these individuals uh, than it is like hope for assimilation. The second one, on principle, a little bit more work is needed in terms of, because technically both sides want what's better for the community, which means the principle then is who the burden is placed on, right? And good job, guys, by the way. Like, these were the only three ways of weighing them, and you guys answered them all. But the principle isn't that we owe them something back, which is something that no op will disagree with, right? Because like op would be racist at that point. Um, every op will agree with you that they need reparations, but like if the situation was worse than it is now, then you are also not proving your principle. So the way you weigh on principle is by arguing who the burden should be on. Like, is it okay to trade off monetary benefits of minorities just because the majority wouldn't want to assimilate with them had we given them their fair share? So that's correct. So we can move on. But if anyone has any questions about the answers given or disagreements, you guys can unmute now. Let me know. Otherwise, we'll move
What does that word mean? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Is it hegemony?
on. Which one?
Like these individuals should have hegemony over their culture.
Oh, yeah, it's pronounced hegemony. It means that um, be, like ownership, but by like one group. So ownership or control is hegemony. So if something is hegemonized by X group or X person, it means that it is largely owned or controlled by that one individual. So in this case, the first line would mean that um, when you pass such a policy, apart from the monetary benefits, it also means that the state concedes that these people have created the culture, and also by extension it was stolen. But like, that's not within this argument, so I haven't written it. But yeah, good. So the second one is this, right? This house. Oh, this This house believes that government have a duty to bail out failing financial institutions. You are opposition. Side government argues that, look, supporting the banks helps the rest of the economy. Financial institutions provide the loans that businesses need to open up, innovate, and invest. With the banks afraid of risks and lacking cash, banks have little capacity to lend money. Without those loans, the pace of growth of the global economy slows substantially and may even go into reverse. Furthermore, economic growth requires business and individuals to be confident enough in the economy to make investment. When the government shows that it's willing to support the economy, investors will have more confidence and economic growth increases. At top, you argue, or your first speakers argue, that corporations are mostly responsible for the crisis. The decision to make risky investments came from the top of the company. While some governments did not sufficiently regulate those corporations, businesses are are ultimately the decision makers, and ultimately they should be the ones paying for the poor decisions they made, instead of having the government pay the price for those risky investments. You guys take a minute to read, or if you already have your answer, as opposition, how do you weigh this argument in your favor? Anyone, guys?
Can we say that in the long term on government, since they're always covering for businesses when they fail, people are going to take very risky actions. So in the long term, you're never going to have a sustainable economy on itself.
Yep, that is correct. That is a correct argument, but an actually really good argument at that. You should definitely run that if this motion ever comes up. But just in terms of weighing the argument OP has made right now against the argument that Gov has made, and I know it seems a little confusing right now, but think of it more in terms of how you would weigh down Gov's arguments for now, then you would then you would weigh up opposition's arguments.
Just to clarify, we're acting as op, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, right. So just one more thing to add. When you're weighing, so the examples I used, that's partly my bad, is that I explained how you can weigh up your arguments, but a lot of weighing is also weighing down the other team's arguments and impacts to prove your arguments are more likely. Or this is especially true, and that directly relates to this example, if you can weigh down the likelihood of the other team's arguments and explain then why your principle should stand just because of how unlikely or how unrealistic the impacts of the other teams are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In that case, can we say like Gov's what Gov's case for their past speakers, like they made the case that like they assume how like failing financial institutions would act. Like they're saying that they would act in a way that like they're not confident, but like as op, it's like we're seeing things more from like a practical or like more realistic like a more realistic reaction, because like in reality like corporations are in fact like accountable for the decisions they make, and it shouldn't be something government carries just because they're not like quote unquote confident enough. Otherwise that would not be like very feasible for governments to bail out like financial institutions. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
It does a little. I think you're on the right path, wherein the criticism for just how government's case is quite glib in such a debate, wherein like I don't think that the issue of the argument is that they say the word like they're going for just a confidence angle, but in general, if you look at the case, it's very idealistic in that it assumes that a failing financial institution had like as soon as it's bailed out is going to act one in a way that is giving out loans to like small businesses and people who are innovating, as opposed to just lending riskily again. It's assuming that in the absence of these failing institutions, there are no other banks or institutions that are succeeding and can step in, or for that matter, the state can step in, and then it's assuming that all of the economic growth that exists is sort of dependent on credit. So just in terms of like, you're right that government isn't realistic, but these are the things you want to target, because a lot of
Okay.
teams, yeah.
Thank
Wait, is
you.
that part? No worries. Was that part clear?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. So just one more thing to keep in mind is this will happen in a lot of debates where teams will have these weird domino effect arguments where they'll talk about one small thing goes wrong, and then we're gonna have like World War IV the next day or something. So you need to call out that this isn't like because the world reacts to events happening. You can't just assume that like one bad thing is like going to lead to like dominoes will like continue to fall, right? And that's something that you can call out at opposition. If anyone has any other ways to go about this or wants to add or ask something, let me know.
Can we
So in the
assume
longer
that-
run,
oh,
I didn't see who asked, so either of you can go first, and then I'll get a second person.
yeah, Ayush, you can go first.
Yeah, so basically what I was saying was in the longer run, what is happening on side government is that you're creating a form of irresponsible behavior on the part of financial institutions, given that the incentive structure and the motivations with which they work tends to remain the same, right? So as
Yeah.
we characterized and we talked about how the decision making powers are still at the top of the company. So they will just continue to make these irresponsible decisions, given that they know that the government has realized that, oh, they have to bail them out every single time, and something that we have done in the past but also hasn't worked. So in the longer run, you create like a much worse world on sidecar.
Yep. Again, I think someone said this. The first person to answer this question said the same thing. That's an excellent argument to make. Like in any debate about institutions, you need to talk about incentive structures, precedent, and all of this. But that's not you weighing the arguments that are here. So that is like valuable in a debate, but that like doesn't add to these two specific arguments right now.
Then
If
it-
that makes sense. Yeah.
Then is it
Sorry.
on a principle?
You are audible. Yeah.
So do we wait on the principle then that the government shouldn't be coddling corporations?
Yeah, excellent. Exactly. So not like on government principle, because I think that's also something that's little like technically the principle, like the government has to protect its people. So principally the government is right also. But rather what your team has run here is that, look, the company made a bad decision, so it should be punished proportionately. So the principle here isn't that the government shouldn't do this, but rather that company should be failing for this, and people within the company should be penalized for that. But yeah, it's about principle. So that's the last way you could have weighed these specific arguments. If anyone else has any questions or anything, let me know.
Can we assume that if this motion was passed, like from government side in their world, like the citizens would be taxed even heavier, because obviously the government has to make other expenses, right? So if now they're
Mhm.
providing backup to financial institutions as well, this probably means the citizens will be asked to pay a much bigger price, like in terms of tax, because now the government has another duty to fulfill. And we don't think that the citizens, like this money should come out of the pocket of these citizens, because obviously it's not the decisions of the citizens that are causing these institutions to fail.
Yep, you can definitely run that. I think that's a good argument to run on up. But again, like that isn't specifically weighing those two arguments. But definitely something you should run if this motion comes at opposition. You can talk about how this is an unnecessary burden on like poor taxpayers and why it's bad for them. You can even talk about how this money goes away from welfare, and so on. Like that, completely fair argument to make. Anyone else has any questions or? Okay, so wait, I'll just check the chat once. Right. So on training, right? Once again, that's my bad. I should have asked before I took the session, but I'm not sure how deep into your debating career you guys are. But the thing to notice that like sessions, matter files, YouTube videos, watching debates can only go so far. When you really want to improve, or when you really want to practice all of these 7 weighing methods and setting metrics, you need to like practice weekly. You need to take time out and go ahead and train yourself, and that's the only real way you'll be able to weigh debates better, or give better speeches. So two things you can do. Right, before that, there is no substitute to like full debate mocks, right? Not even a half mock, no short speeches mock. If you can do full debates as practice, like you have access to people, you have access to judges, and you have the time, then do that. But if you don't, here are two options. One is you can edge debates, right? You can go ahead and the way you do that is like literally edging the debate. Like if you have a friend, send them your OA. If not, then just compare your verdict in the room at least, and edge the debate like you're actually judging around, and so on. It's beneficial like for two reasons. One is that it helps you like track and learn arguments, and see how the good whips are weighing, or how the two speakers are weighing in a really good room. Secondly, compare verdicts to see if your understanding of like how judges work is correct. And by correct, I don't think any judge is wrong, right? I don't want to say that, but you need to understand how judges think to win debates, because it's at the end of the day an activity of persuasion. So even though you might think certain arguments logically make sense, if in generally people don't agree with that, or in general judges don't agree with that, your speeches won't matter or won't be as effective. So judging a few debates, seeing how the judges thought about the debate in that room will help you guys a lot. Other than that, if you have even more time after you have judged a debate, what you can do is assume you are the whip of the losing team, or you can't do this so much for the first speaker because that's just PM practice. But if you're the whip or the second speaker of the losing team, note down the things you would do differently to win the debate, and try giving a speech, or just generally noting it down can also be helpful. The second thing you can do to train yourself is weigh written debates. Here are two websites I have mentioned, but like since then there are like a lot of Reddit forums also. There is this app also now which people use where lots of people like put their opinions. Some debaters started that app. I'm sure you can find it if you just check Facebook debates he is posting or something. So what you want to do is just look at the arguments made on these sites and just try to compare them yourself. And the reason for that is because these websites just list one, like an argument of one side. There is no analysis for why one is more valuable than the other, right? Because if that was the case, like a website wouldn't exist. So if you go to like procon.org and see taxation good or bad, you'll just have opinions of people who think it's good, people who think it's bad, and that's where you can like pick one side and practice weighing it yourself. This should like it's fun and helpful. So you might be able to improve based on that. So that's the end of the session. If you guys have any questions now, feel free to ask. Otherwise, you guys can start leaving.
I have a question.
Yep, sure, go ahead.
When it comes to weighing, I remember like earlier in the slide, you mentioned like giving like characterization. What's your tips on making like that imagery like work, like make it more impactful when you're weighing?
So I don't think there are any specific rules for it, but what would work for any general argument also works for characterization. So starting with sound logic, like why is a characterization likely? Like if you're saying that look, this community is poor, then why is it likely to be poor? You can look at things like examples, you can talk about historical context, so on and so forth. Secondly, using examples that directly helps. Thirdly, using rhetoric. I think rhetoric is very few debaters can pull it off without sounding cringy, but like comparing things to like much worse things, like saying that if you're okay with this, you're okay with slavery, or comparing lives of individuals to like lives of people who had it much worse. Um, I know this answer is so weird. I'm so sorry, but like there isn't any unique way of proving characterization. Like it's just as you would any other argument.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. If anyone else has any questions, right? Yeah.
How do we conclude our weighing? Which is to say, so if I'm arguing that in the longer run, this will help us achieve this, do I just finish it there only, or do I conclude it in a way in which it looks comprehensive?
As in within the speech or
Within the speech,
I think yeah, just that you can leave it, and I mean, if it's like little words, you can talk about how, like, if you once you end the logical part of it, you can say that look, this is why we should win the debate, or something like. I'm not sure if I got that question right.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Just in general, because sometimes weighing tends to sound very bland, that in the longer run we'll achieve this, and we just ended there.
Yeah.
So in that way, how can we conclude it? So yeah, I get what you mean. Like this is how we win
Yeah.
the debate and things like.
Yeah, just I think if you're going for like rhetoric when you're weighing, then just connect it to the debate meta. For example, saying that look, if we prove this if we prove this impact, we have to win the debate. Or when you're proving multiple impacts, say that like I'll move on to my next argument, but this impact alone should win us the debate because of how valuable it is. I mean, I myself am not a very rhetoric heavy speaker, so I like can't help you with that too much, but this is how you would probably end it.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone? Is there any way to? Oh, yeah. So to avoid repetition, I'm assuming this probably applies to third speakers because first few speakers won't have this issue. So the only way to avoid repetition is to group things correctly. And I go whip so I can help. Like I know a little bit about this. The what you want to do before you weigh arguments is to group them correctly, which is to say that uh, any arguments that have the same impact or any arguments that have the same weighing, group them within your speech. You're talking about them at one point. Um, Take the South Korea example, right? So every argument you make for why USA will not want to place its nukes in South Korea in the long term, or why maybe the parties might change in America so they take their nukes out, or maybe any argument you make that reduces the likelihood of opposition's claim, group them before you start your speech. So when you end the argument and the value of the argument within the debate is something you have talked about, you can weigh it all together. So the only way, yeah, so the way you reduce repetition is by ensuring you group things correctly. And once you figure that out, then you'll automatically not be repetitive. I hope that makes sense. Okay. If anyone else has any questions.
What categories do you usually group them with as third speaker?
Again, that depends on the debate. So let me just quickly pick a motion so I have a good example to give you. Okay. So for example, this, I don't have a motion when I need one, sorry. Okay, so this house believes that religious education institutions should not receive public funding. So on government, there will be a lot of arguments about why states should not be involved in religion. Then you'll explain why funding provides legitimacy to religion. Then you'll explain these funds could have gone in any other place. On opposition, you'll explain why religious freedom requires state to sort of intervene and provide those freedoms and be assured to all. Second, you'll explain why state intervention within religion leads to moderation, and thirdly, you'll mitigate government's impacts of religion isn't that bad, religion is okay in some cases, right? So when you're going whip in this debate, the way you want to group them is first start with grouping what you think your team proved the best. So the first question you'd probably answer is oh, is religion good or not? Then you'd move on to, since I proved to you it's not good, what are the impacts of state entering religion? Herein you'll weigh all the arguments of them saying it means you can control and modernize religion, and you saying no, it gives legitimacy to religion. Weigh all of them in this clash. In the third clash, then you can just generally talk about principle and where funds could have gone in other places. This is just one example, but that varies heavily from debates. The categories will just change based on what debate you're having right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, cool then. Bye guys. Thanks for coming.